I hope you can hear me okay. And good morning from Australia. Hi, Debbie, Fiona, Anne, welcome. All right, for those that don't know me, I am called Linda and I help absolute beginners draw animals using pastel pencils. Now, this is my very first live draw along, so thank you so much for joining me. I've had over 1,000 people register, which has just been absolutely amazing. Hi, Kathy. Now, I'll be recording this session, so don't worry if you can't keep up with me. The most important thing is just have some fun. We'll have some fun together drawing this little bunny. Now, while I am actually drawing, I'm not going to be able to see any of the comments or questions, but my lovely husband, Mick, is going to help me where he can. Now, if he can't answer a question, then he'll flag it for me and I'll answer it at the end of the actual little drawing session. All right, so tech is not my strong suit. So I really hope I don't cut everyone off by pressing the wrong button on this new Star Spangled system I'm using. I'm going to move over to my drawing desk now, just behind me here, and switch over my cameras. So if you just bear with me, we will get started with the drawing. So hopefully sound and everything's still good. Just give a sing out to Mick if there's any issues, but we should be fine. All right, let's get started. All right, now with any portrait, I like to come in and do the eyes first. I think it just sort of fixes your portrait on your paper. It gives you a focal point to work around. But again, that's an individual sort of thing, but I do prefer to do that. So I'm just going to grab the black. This is 750. And just come around the outline. You want a reasonably sharp point on your pencil. And the reason being is that we are working on a small scale. So we've just got to be aware of the space that we've got available. And you'll notice here, I'm not going into where that reflection is. I want that reflection to stay nice and bright. So we don't want any of that black going in there. And because that'll just obviously make getting that lighter colour so much harder. Now you can see in the reference image, there's just the tiniest little bit of that blue, whether it's coming from, the sky, from the, because I'm assuming this little bunny's in a hutch or something like that. So we just want to take, this is the 435. Sorry, I must be mindful to mention the pencils as I go. So the 435 is the ultramarine blue light. And all I'm doing is just dabbing a bit of that blue at the top of that highlight. I'm then going to come in with the white, the 100, and I'm just going to dab that just at the bottom. And you can actually see the shape of that little reflection. It does have a little bit of that black sort of coming up in between. So just be very careful. And then we can come back in with that black and we can just add that tiny little mark that just gives that actual reflection, that little bit of shape. And it's these little sort of things, even if we are working on a much smaller sort of section, it's these little sort of details that make all the difference. All right, so I think that's all we can really do for that eye at the moment. What we're going to work on now is getting our base layers down. Now, normally when I'm doing a larger portrait, I will just work on a little section at a time, but because this, is a relatively small drawing anyway, I think what I want to do is get our base layers down probably across the whole bunny. And then once they're down, then we can work on our detail. Because I realise that we're a bit limited on our time together today. So the more that we can get done, I think the better. And then, like I said, I'll finish it off and send you that recording. So we want to start just round the eye here. Now, on this side of the eye, it is quite dark for the actual base colour. And when we're putting down our base layers, that's what we've got to sort of pay attention to. More so than getting the colour exactly right, we want to get the tonal value is more important, getting that contrasts in the colours. And it's also, it works as a bit of a guide for you as well when you do come to put those other layers on the top. So I'm going to use a bit of a warmer grey. I'm going to use the 704, and that's the warm grey 3. And I'm going to pop that in where that lighter section is around the eye. So we're just going to be careful here. Medium sort of pressure. And I'm just going to plot that in where the lighter area is around the eye. We don't want to be bringing that darker colour sort of right up close to the eye there. So it's always a lot harder, like I said, to brighten things up. So if we can do that in our base layer, then all the more power to us, I reckon. Okay. And then at this side here, I want it to be darker. You can see it's darker down this, basically this whole side of the little face. So I'm going to use the 708, and that's the warm grey 5. Again, we always want to be mindful as well of our reference images. Now, for example, I can see that I'm going to come back in with that 704, and I'm just going to pull it up just a little bit more. And then I'll come in with that 708, and then I'll actually just fill in that little section there. And I'll sort of try and transition it to blend in with that colour sitting sort of next to it. So we've got it darker as it comes in towards the eye of the little bunny here. But I'm not going to worry too much about detail here. This is more about just getting down that base layer and getting that shape correct. Now, even in these early sort of stages of your drawing, you want to be looking at the direction of your fur, and that is where you basically want to be, you know, sort of putting your direction of your strokes down. So just work your way around that little section of the face, remembering that this is just the base layer. It does come up a little bit lighter in here, and then as it comes more around this side, it's going more into that brown sort of tone. So I'm going to grab a brown. I don't want it to be too light. So I'm going to use the 635, and that's the Bister. Again, just coming in to this area here that we can see has just got more of that browny tone. Now we don't want to use too much pressure. This is really, it's a hard one to sort of gauge because it does come with practice. But with this base layer, we do want a little bit of pressure, for the sole reason is if we don't put enough pigment down, we run the risk of our drawings looking a bit more grainy. And it is a little bit of a fine line just to determine how much of that pigment you do actually need to have down on your paper. If I could sort of give you one sort of indication, let me just grab a little piece of just a putty rubber. Get it, try and get a clean sort of section of it would be good. All right, so if you can imagine your pressure on this little piece of putty rubber, you do want it to be sort of that sort of pressure. You want to have a bit of an indent into your putty rubber. If you just sort of do this and just glaze, you're not going to get enough pigment down on that paper. But then at the same time, you don't want to be doing that either. So it's one of those things that sometimes if you just give it a practice, it's amazing how quick you'll sort of get to know yourself what that pressure needs to be. Now while I've got that brown, I'm going to come in and over here as well, and just again just popping in this little section over here. Going around the nose is quite dark. And fill just that whole little section there with that. That's 635. Now it comes round the nose, and again the darker colour only goes so far and then it becomes lighter. Again, just be aware. I'm just going to get rid of a little bit of that dust. I just use one of these little air puffer tools that you get for cleaning out your keyboards and things like that. These are really good. Only tip is, don't go right up close to your drawing because it will blow the pastel dust off your actual area you don't want it to come off of. And because I work upright, because I've got you know, a bad back, my dust tends to sort of look a little bit worse when it does sort of fall down onto the paper. All right, so I think that's enough of that. Maybe just a little bit of that darker brown just on the edge, just around that little edge there of the nose. Probably just in this little section here. Again, we've got that little nostril, and then there's a lighter section underneath. This little area around here is quite dark, so we'll plot that in there, I think. All right, now we want to go a little bit lighter now with that brown. I don't want it to be too red. I think I'll use the 610, the raw umber, and I'm going to use it as the base layer for the actual little nose. There's a lighter section there as well up the side of that nose, so I'm going to try and avoid that as best I can. And then I'm just going to fill that in. It's still got that reddy sort of tone, but I think we might get away with it. And look, at the end of the day, your colours aren't the most important thing. What is really important is the tonal values in your drawing. I mean, you might be looking at this now and thinking, well, that's way too dark. But once we start adding our lighter layers on the top, that's when we'll actually make the adjustments to the colour. All right, now we've got a little section just up in here. So I'm just going to, while I've got that pencil in my hand, I am just being aware of where that sort of ear is. So we'll just have that little bit of that brown just up the edge. Tiniest little bit, just maybe at the back. Now, like I said, if I was doing a much bigger portrait, I wouldn't be coming in on such a large scale with my base layer. But like I said, I'm a bit conscious of just trying to get as much done in this live sort of part as we can. Now again, I'm coming in with that brown because I've got it in my hand, and I'm just sort of looking at where, you know, I could lay that down. And I think up in this little ear section, again, it's a little bit brighter at the edge. So always look at your reference and just sort of try and pull these colours sort of into the right section. Don't make it harder for yourself. I think over just on the edge of this little nose could be just a little bit lighter. Be a little bit just in between, just at the edge of that darker brown that we popped in as it sort of comes in. I always, when we do our portraits, when you've got, you know, one colour going into another, it's always good to have like a transition, like a more of a mid-tone to sort of blend the two together. So just be aware of that as well. I know it's a lot to sort of take in on a, you know, just a relatively quick sort of drawing like we're doing. But if you can sort of leave this drawing just with having that sort of basic understanding so that you can then sort of follow along with some other tutorials, then that'll be great. Okay, now I'm going to come back in now. I think I'll use, it's quite light. Let me have a look. Now another thing I usually do as well is I'll always have a spare piece of my whatever colour pastel mat I'm using. I'll have it just at the side of my drawing, and I'll test out my colours before I'll put it onto my drawing. Now I am trying to stick as much as I can to the colours that I did put down on the material list, because obviously that's what you've prepared for. So like I said, colour isn't going to be too much of an issue. It's going to be more just getting our contrast and getting our tonal values right. So I'm going to use the 706, and that's the warm grey 4. I'm just going to add a bit of that just in, again, bit of a transition, just coming out the side, and then just a little bit just to soften just down this side of this face. It's a bit lighter, it's not quite as dark in that grey. I think I'll use it up here in this little section here of the ear. This is a bit of a base colour. It's very sort of similar to the colour of the paper really, but it's got just that warmer sort of tone. I just want to get that down sort of first. Maybe a little bit down in here. In this little section, we will brighten this up. Down in here as well. And then it does get brighter as it comes up. So I might even use the 270 for this one. This is the warm grey one. Again, just where you can see that lighter area just coming up and around on that ear. Always add just a little bit over the top. Again, just have a look at your reference, have a look at those colours. And if we just need to just add a little bit just into that base layer, before we give that all a bit of a blend. Now round the edge of that ear is quite dark, so I'm going to use the 175 for that one. That's the dark sepia. And I'm just going to come in just at the tip of that ear. Don't want it to be too dark all the way around. So I'm actually going to swap over probably to maybe even back to that, just to that, maybe the 610, the raw umber. It might not be dark enough. I'm just going to run it down. It's that edge of the ear. Now look, don't worry if I'm moving a little bit too quick for you, because I will be sending out a recording of this. So if you do get a little bit lost, then, you know, just follow along as best you can. And like I say, I'll send out the recording of this as well as any part that we don't get finished. So I'm just pulling, you can see in the reference you've just got a bit of that brown just sort of coming more into the actual ear itself there. So we want to make sure that we're getting that plotted in. And then within the actual ear itself, we've got more of that sort of pinky sort of tone. So I'm going to use the 642, and that's the Caput Mortuum Violet Light. And just where that more pinky section is, I'm just going to come in and put that down as our base layer. Now you might be looking at that thinking, oh God, Linda, that is way too pink. But that's all right. We want that pinky tone to be coming through. And we're going to add our darker colours into there. So I'm probably going to come in, might use the 708 to start with. And that's the warm grey 5. I think I will need to darken this down more. Yeah, it definitely will need to be darker. But just add that, just coming down onto that inner sort of section of the ear. Again, we're just sort of changing up that colour of that more pinky tone. And then I think I will come in probably with a 181. And that's the Payne's Grey. And you can see how much darker that is. That'll work quite nicely, I think. Again, just coming in on that, you know, that little section there on the ear. Just run that down that little edge here of the ear as well. Again, just getting rid of a little bit of that dust. Needs to be a bit darker as well, just in some of this little section in here. Probably needs to be more, the Payne's Grey is more of that grey, obviously in the name, it's got more of that grey tone, as where the 175, the dark sepia, is more brown. So I might actually come back in over the top of that with a bit of that dark sepia, just to darken that down just a little bit. Again, you want to keep things reasonably soft as well. Just, you know, don't have harsh edges. You know, just by giving your pencil just a little sort of rotation in your hand, you can, you know, it makes it so much softer coming down and onto the paper. I mean, like I said, we're going to be giving all of this a bit of a blend anyway. Just want to be careful not to come over my lines either, because I'm not doing a background here. I want to keep this nice and clean. And this is just one of those kneadable erasers, and they're fantastic because you can just mold them into different shapes, little points, and then you can just run that just along the edge of your paper. Keeps everything nice and clean. All right. I might just blend that ear. So I'm going to use a cotton bud, because I love using cotton buds for my blending, especially on smaller subjects. But you can also use a blending stump on bigger areas. You can use your finger, which I'm a great fan of doing. And all we want to do, excuse me, is just gently sort of just push that pigment down into the paper. But what you do want to be aware of is not to blend it all together, because then you're just going to muddy up all of your colours. So just come across on your darker sections and give them just a little press down. Just turn your Q-tip over and you can come in on your lighter sections. And just again, when you're blending as well, just be aware of the direction that you're blending, even in these early stages, because it does make all the difference. It does help you if you're going in that right direction of the fur, or if you're doing a bit of skin like we are inside the ear here. I mean, the ear is quite out of focus. Really only the little face of the bunny has a lot of detail in it. But you still want to sort of look at it and just sort of gauge for yourself, what direction are those little hairs in those ears going? Because that's going to make all the difference in the realism of your actual little bunny. Now again, when you come into this lighter section, just grab yourself either a new Q-tip, and that's why I like using Q-tips, because they're relatively cheap to buy, and you can just dispose of it. Use one for your lighter colours, one for your darks. I just think it sort of works so much better. All right, I'm quite happy with that base layer there on the ear. Probably the only thing it needs is a little bit darker in here. I might just grab that 175. And again, I just want to make sure that that's reasonably soft. And always add a little bit more. I'll come back in with that 181, that Payne's Grey, and I am just going to just darken down just that little bit in the ear. Again, just one layer, base layer, but I know that that's going to be reasonably dark. Like so. Okay, let's work more on this little face, and I want to get some of this sort of white fur sort of plotted in. Now, one thing to know about white fur, as well as if you're doing black fur as well, it's never always white, very rarely. And the same with your black fur. Black fur's always got a colour in it, whether it be a bit of brown, some purples, a bit of blue. You've always got to have a really good look at your reference image, because if you go ahead and put in just a flat black, for example, or a flat white, it's going to look just that. It's going to look flat. You need to have a little bit of that contrast, and we get that in by putting in that base layer. Now, one thing with white, and again, every portrait's different, you don't want to come in too dark with your underpainting if it's a really bright white fur. Like this little section here, for example, on the bunny is really bright. Same with up here on his forehead. So I don't want to be darkening that down too much, otherwise we'll never get that vibrancy back. So we just need to be aware of that. Now I'm going to just do this little section behind his ear here. You can see it is a little bit darker on because it's going more onto the body at the back of him. So I'm just going to use that 708, that warm grey 5, and I'm just going to plot that in as the bit of a base layer, just coming round the edge. Again, I want to just make sure that I'm coming over the top of that transfer line. And my transfer lines are a little bit darker. And I should have probably mentioned this at the start. But if you ever feel that your transfer lines are just a little bit too dark, just take your kneadable eraser and just dab it. I'll do it on this little bit here where that shadow is going to be. And if you just dab it on the paper, you can see how it just lifts it. I just didn't want to do that because I didn't want you guys not to be able to see my outline. But if you're looking at your drawing and you just think it's just that bit on the, on the bright side, and you're struggling a little bit to cover it, then just a little dab with that kneadable eraser will just lift that pigment off. All right, so back to the white. Now, on this little section here of the nose, it is actually quite dark. So I'm going to use that 708 that I just used here. I'm going to use that here as well. And it might look really, really strange to be putting such a dark colour in here now. But you can see when you have a look at the actual bunny itself, the fur that's closest to the skin of the bunny is actually quite dark. And it's a lot easier sometimes to get that, get that tonal value in there now, so that your highlights and your lighter layers show up, than trying to put darks in between your lights. All I'm doing here is I'm just coming along this transfer line. I just want to darken that down a little bit. I'm just sort of going back and forth in like a little jagged sort of motion, because that will all sort of blend into this white sort of fur that we're going to be popping in a minute. There's this little section up here towards the ear, again, is quite dark, so I'm going to use a bit of that 708. Now I want to be considering going a bit lighter on this base layer. Again, I don't want to come in too dark, and I don't want it to look too blue either. So some of these more bluey colours that I've put on the material list, I might not end up using. We'll see how we go. 270 is just a bit on the warm side. I'm going to use the 110 for the really bright. It does have a bit of a bluey tone to it, but I think that's going to be my best option. I don't want it to be too warm of a tone. So with your greys, you're going to have your warm greys, which are going to have more of that brown sort of warmth to them, and your colder greys are going to have more of a bluey tint to them. So always be aware of that when you are sort of plotting in any of your underpaintings. So this is the 110, which is actually called the grey white. It does still have a little bit of that blue tinge to it, but it is quite a nice colour. Now, like I said, you could come in here and go straight in with your white, for example. But by doing that, you've got nowhere to go. You've got no, you can't brighten up your white because white is, you know, your lightest tone is white. So I always like to come in where possible, like I said, just with that slightly more muted tone. Unfortunately, we don't have much option when it's really bright. Oh, I just blew my pastel dust away there. That is a no-no. You shouldn't do it. Old habits tend to die hard a little bit. I should really always use my little puffer tool. Now, all I'm doing here, now this is another little tip. When you're ever coming in and over a darker area with your pencil, just have a little bit of kitchen roll or something like that, or tissue, so that you can actually wipe your pencil. Because if you drag that colour back in to your lighter area, that's when you're going to muddy your colours. So you really want to be aware that every time that pencil comes over, give that a bit of a wipe. Even if you've got to do it every single time. I mean, if you're not touching the actual dark area, then you're fine. But as soon as you get close to that, and you've potentially got a bit of that pigment, you can see even there, I'm getting a little bit of it there. It is a lot harder when you're sort of working on these smaller areas. Ah, there, perfect example. So you can see on the tip of my pencil now that I've got a little bit of that darker pigment, and it's transferred it onto there, which has instantly made that darker colour. So what I'm going to try and do, and sometimes it won't be too much of a concern if there is darker areas coming through that fur. Like there is a few here, I could probably get away with it. But what I want to do is try and lift that pigment if I can. So I'm just going to come in with that kneadable eraser and just dab where some of that brown is just deposited. And then I can come back in with my clean pencil and just come in and over the top. So when you sort of do have issues with your muddier colours, that could be one of the reasons. Either you're over blending and you're blending colours together, or you're pulling that darker pigment in over the top. Now over on, actually I'll continue coming around his little face here. So we've got, again, quite bright just under his nose. What I might do, I know I'm jumping a little bit here, and I do apologise. I'm going to come in with the black, the 750, and I'm just going to plot in this little nostril and this little divider, so where it comes down to his mouth. We've just got that little line there, and then we've got the little dark nostril. Again, reasonably sharp pencil here. And then we've got this much finer line Just coming up the other side. And then I can come back in with that 110. I'm just going to lock in. And I can't be dragging the hairs out from the part of the face yet because we've still got this little ear here. But we just want to get that base layer on that side of his little face. Now underneath here, we've also got that white sort of fur just sort of coming around. Again, careful when you're coming up to these darker colours that you're cleaning off that pencil. Again, I'm not going to bring this too far down because I think I'm going to concentrate on this back little area. A little less sort of area that you've got to worry about smudging, the better. And like I say, I probably wouldn't normally block in this much of a portrait. But I want to make sure, like I said, in this short time that we've actually got to draw together, that you are managing to at least have a result at the end of it. And just want to be careful of that dust. Okay, that'll probably be enough just on that little section. I'm going to sharpen this pencil. I'm just going to use my craft knife. Doesn't have to be overly sharp at the moment because we're not putting in too many sort of fine details. We'll just give it a little bit of a point. And of course, I can always just finish off. I like to just finish off on a bit of sandpaper and just give it a little bit of a point on the sandpaper. Okay, I'm going to come in and I'm going to block in this back section here. Now I'm going to keep using that 110 just for this little area right at the back. You can always just sort of make any little adjustments we feel we need as we go. But it is quite out of focus, more so probably than the rest of the bunny right at the back here. Again, we just want to sort of plot in some of that base layers. We've got a darker little section just at the back of where his head sits. So I'm going to come in with the 708, and that's the warm grey 5. And I'm just going to have a look at that reference and just see where some of that darker colour is. Again, I want to just run a little bit at the back. We'll be making sure that we're getting our shape right. Over here you can see just that thin black line there is actually the other eye. So I'm going to come in with the black. There's a few little eyelashes there, but I'm not going to stress about them at the moment. And I'm just going to make sure that that black's sharp. Just going to give that a little rub on my sandpaper. And then I'm just going to come up that edge and just plot in a bit of that black. And it does sort of come around just onto that ear. That's not part of the eye, but it is much darker. So while I've got that black in my hand, I'm going to just sort of plot that in. Same just up here, there's a lighter section in between, but again, we've got that darker little section just coming up there. So I'll just plot that in while I've got it in my hand. Now this other section here is again reasonably dark, similar to this tone here. So this is the 708. I'm just going to pop that in just in that little center section at the side of the face. Alright, again, I'm seeing a little bit of that grey tone just right at the back. I'm just going to pop a little bit of that in, and then we're going more into that sort of warm, sort of browny colours. I'm thinking I might use the 625, which is the burnt umber, and I'm just going to plot that in more or less across the whole of this little back section. We've got this lighter bit at the front here, so just be careful there. Careful just coming around your ear. And I'm just going to put this in first. Going to bring that up to that transfer line. Just come down here. It does get a bit lighter. I think I'll just add that lighter tone over the top because it is so out of focus. I think we can afford to get away with that. Alright, it's got a little bit of that pinky sort of tone to it. So I might use a combination. I might use that 642, which was the Caput Mortuum Violet Light. And I'm just going to add it just in that sort of centre section of the bunny's body. There's a little bit just on this edge here. I'm going to add a bit of that sort of pinky colour too. And then I'm going to come in with the 681, and I'm just going to lighten that up a little bit. Again, we'll be blending this because it is very soft and out of focus, but it'll just lighten up some of the tone in that little section. And always just sort of pop that over the top of that brown as well, just to brighten that up a little bit. Now always be aware as well when you're doing any sort of drawing is you can get yourself the glassine paper, which you can get in between the sheets of the pastel mat, or you can buy them in rolls or big sheets. And it's always handy just to have one just next to your drawing, and you can always just lay it over the top so that you can rest your hand so you're not smudging your drawing. So if you do have a piece of glassine paper and you feel when you're working on this back section that you're maybe just leaning on your drawing a little bit, just grab a little bit of your glassine paper and just put that underneath your hand. Alright, now I'm going to come in and just blend this back little section. Again, just coming in with my Q-tip and being aware again of just what colours I'm blending first. I certainly don't want to be pulling, too much of this brown down into that lighter section. It does have a grey sort of tone here, so we will add probably a little bit more of our bluey greys in there. But for here, I just want to push that pigment down Get that base layers in. Gonna soften, careful we're not bringing in, bringing in that pinky color where it doesn't belong. So just swap over that Q-tip. And then I'm just going to grab a fresh one. Again, just coming in, pushing that pigment down. Just a little blend. Just on that transition between one or the other. We don't want this to come too pinky though, because it is quite grey and out of focus. I think it needs to be a bit darker up in the back here. I'm going to use that 175, that dark sepia, and just all along the back. Again, we can just see that it's darker. You can see I'm just using that little sort of circular motion when I'm applying that pigment, because I want this to be soft. We don't want any sort of harsh edges there. I'm just coming in where some of these darker areas are. But just at the back of this little whiter section. And then I'm just going to come in with that Q-tip. Again, just very controlled, soft little circular motions. And just push that pigment down into the paper, keeping it soft. Definitely need to lighten this up a little bit in the center. That's okay. Like I said, this is just our first layer. All right, I'm going to come in and get this little lighter section here plotted in. I'm going to use the 720 for this one, and it's the cold grey one. Just coming in, just again, it's very blurry, very out of focus. I'm going to add just a little bit of that, just over that section there. While I've got this one in my hand, I'm actually going to lighten up that little bit of that ear as well. I think that'll have to be a lot lighter than it is, but never be afraid either when if you've got a pencil in your hand and you notice that, yeah, that might work really well there. Don't wait till the end to do it. Just, you've got the pencil there, just do it. I'm just going to add a little bit more of that tone, just coming into this base layer, just to lighten up this edge, because it is quite bright. Even though it's out of focus and we can't really see it, it is quite a, tonal value wise, it is quite light. So you're just going to be aware. One here, again, I'm just going to soften clean Q-tip here. Just running along that little grey section. Pushing that down into the paper a little bit. I'm just going to move this glassine because it's making a little bit of a noise. Now I'm just going to, because it is a bit too bright, I'm going to grab the 681, which is our light flesh tint, and I'm just going to glaze over some of this area in the back. Now when I speak about glazing, don't think I've mentioned this already, when I speak about glazing, I'm holding the pencil far down the barrel and I'm just skimming the top of the paper. You can see that it's not even making an indent in that putty rubber. All you're doing is just depositing a bit of that pigment over what's already there on your drawing. So I just want this whole section even further up, right at the back of the bunny, just to be lighter. And you don't need a lot of pressure, like I said, you're just adding the tiniest bit of that lighter pigment. And that can more or less afford to go over most of the back of this bunny, because like I said, it is very, very soft and out of focus. So we certainly don't want any harsh sort of lines where they sort of don't belong. Now you can come in and just dab that with your finger, but because this is quite a small little spot, I am just going to come in with my Q-tip and just soften. Just dabbing. I don't want to be blending it all the way. I'm just dabbing over where I've glazed, just to brighten it up. And it still needs to be, you know, to be brighter. But I'm not going to stress too much about that until I've actually got, you know, the rest of this bunny sort of plotted in. Because this little out of focus section will all be determined by the detail that we get in the rest of the bunny. Okay. I'm going to blend this part of the face now. So I want to start getting some detail into this face before we have to finish for today. So again, I'm just going to come in with that Q-tip. I'm coming in on that lighter section first. Being very careful with the blending. Just ever so gently, just pushing that down. Same on this side. And then I'm just going to turn that over, coming on this lighter section. This little section just in between. And then we can sort of move on more to that brown. Very gentle. Still got this little bit of this little section just in the nose here. more or less just softening these transitions. Edges are nice and blended. I'm just coming in with a new one here, just on this little grey section. And softening. This little section here can just be blended a little bit, just into that white. Lighten up the nose just a little bit. And then I'm just going to get rid of some of that dust. All right. This little section just in here, I'm just going to add a little bit of that 704. That's the warm grey 3. And just to brighten up just underneath that nose. Again, we can always just take our Q-tip, sort of soften that edge a little bit. All right, start building up some of the detail just in this little face. So I'm going to start on this sort of edge of the eye. So we want to be coming in with a slightly darker sort of tone. So it is quite grey over on that side, so I'll probably want to stick with the 181, the Payne's grey. And I'm just going to come in and just having a look at where some of those darker little strands are sort of sitting on our reference image. Now we do have that darker little area is coming out from that eye and coming up towards his ear. And then we've got the darker little sections just running down the cheek. Now I'm not going to stress about getting these little eyelashes in yet. All I'm doing here is just looking at where I can add some of these Payne's grey little hairs coming through. Again, more brown in this little section. So I want to keep the grey more to this sort of side of the face. Now we don't want to be completely covering this base layer either. We want to be making sure that we're just popping in that darker pigment where we can see it on our drawing. Like this little area up here needs to be a lot brighter. I might even come in with a little bit of that 720 cold grey 1. Again, just adding a bit of that just in between. Yeah, looking at that reference. And it's very out of focus. So don't be tempted to put in too much detail on really small sort of drawings. it's really important that we sort of basically stick to the limitations of the size. You're still always going to have a bit of a look back. So I'm just continuing with this 720 here, and I'm just breaking up this edge with a little bit of that grey. Just coming in between. Yeah, we've got to be careful. Sorry, I was away in a little bit of a tangent there. You do have to be aware of how much detail you can get in, because sometimes less is more. If you end up putting far too much detail down on a small drawing, it's going to look less realistic. So it's really important. I mean, I'm not trying to put individual little fur strokes here, for example, because it's almost impossible to see that. I'm just every now and again, I'm just adding a little bit of that pigment, making sure that those lighter little sections are brighter, and where it needs to be darker, you come in with, our darker tones. So, I mean, I could come back in now with that 181. Again, just picking up just a few little dark hairs. Pop a little bit more pressure down if you want it to be just that tiny little bit darker. A few little hairs. I'm going to make sure that that pencil's nice and sharp. And that is another thing, working on a smaller portrait, your pencils, you do need to focus a little bit more on having those pencils sharp. I'm just pulling a few of those darker ones just out into that top area. We'll come in over the top of that with some of our lights as well. A bit darker just in there. I'm going to come in with the 175, which is the dark sepia. And I'm going to use it just more on these brown areas. And again, I'm just having a look at that reference, having a look at the shape, pulling some of those darker hairs. Just down the side here. These little ones down here are more of that brown tone. Little ones just coming up and around the eye. Just up and around the nose as well. And I've got that pencil in my hand. Just going to look and see where the darkest sections are. And just pull out those dark hairs. Then coming up onto this section here. Again, we want to try and be mindful of the direction that fur is going. Probably add a little bit of that brown tone just into the side of the face. Sort of little ones coming out from that section. Again, just round this little area here. A few of those dark sepia hairs through. Again, just look at that reference. It's really, really important so that you can get those values in the right spot. Tiny little bit of that dark sepia just in here. Alright, so I'm going to come in with a bit of that lighter tones now. It's such a small area. We are really limited to the detail that we can get in here, like the amount of layers and colours. So as we could normally put down a few layers, we just don't have the space for that. So I'm going to come in, I think I'll use the 720, the cold grey one, because I just want to lighten up just a couple of these little sections on the side of the face. Again, just little sort of dots, little marks. We don't really have the space to be drawing in, you know, massive, lengths of hair. We've got to still be very aware of how short that hair is on certain parts, but we've also got to be very aware of how soft we're making it as well. We don't want it to be harsh. Add just a little bit of that pigment just up the edge of that eye. I want it to be lighter. Same just around the edge of the eye. Tiny little dab just to brighten that up a little bit. Might just give that a little sharpen. A few of these just out on top of that sort of little eyebrow area. Again, just want to have a look here, see what could be brightened up a little bit. So we can always just pull a few little hairs just through. Like I said, keep it soft. Put that little shape here, just on that little section. It sort of comes in a little bit of a square before it sort of comes around the top of that eye. And just bring a few of them into that brown area. Just remember, if you're going into that dark area, just clean off that tip of that pencil. While I've got that grey, I'm just going to come up into this little section here and just add a few of those hairs just up and in between that darker little section that we popped in there. We also want to be bringing some of those greys down. Remember what I said, give that Now give that tip of that pencil a little wipe off. The last thing we want to be doing is dragging that, dragging that brown sort of colour up into this section of the fur. And I'm just sort of working around, pulling some of that. See, I did it there. See if I can fix that. I've now got a bit of that brown coming into that section purely because I didn't clean the tip of my pencil. So just one flick in, clean the pencil. There we go. All right, now I want to add, this needs to be a lot lighter. I'm going to come in, I think I'll use the 182. So that's our brown ochre. Again, just looking at that reference. Pulling a few of those hairs. A little bit just up the side here. While I've got that pencil, I'm going to do the same just with this little section here of the nose. Again, you want to be looking at the direction that those hairs are actually travelling. There's more up the centre. We don't want to sort of brighten things up too much. I'm going to pull just a few, just in this section here. It needs to be a bit lighter, so I might even use a bit of the ivory. So that's the 103. Again, just a few little hairs just coming through. This still looks quite dark because we haven't got this little section in here yet. And just little dabs. We're not trying to put in huge sort of long tufts of hair here. I'll look and see where it's a little bit brighter. You know what might be nice there is a bit of that 681, just a little bit more of that pinky fleshy tone with a light flesh tint. Ever so gently, just a few little hairs coming through. A little bit maybe just coming off of that lighter section just beside the eye. Nice and soft. All right, I want to get this little section in here because I think that will just make a huge difference to the overall look. So I'm going to use the 110, that grey white, and we'll just start pulling. Nice sharp point. Just going to get that a wee sharpen. And again, very aware of where these hairs are coming out from. I'm just starting in this corner, and then I'm just pulling those hairs out. Again, be mindful of that pencil if you're going into that darker areas. Now, if it's more comfortable for you, you can always sort of rotate your drawing when you are actually popping in some of these hairs that are going in like a different direction. It's easier for you to sort of manipulate. I just don't like to move it while I'm actually drawing or filming, so I tend to just try and just sort of move my hand as best as I can. Again, just you still want to be seeing some of that background. You want to be aware of how, where you're placing some of these strokes, how far some of these little hairs are coming out. Now this obviously needs to be a lot brighter. So what I might do now is come in with the actual white. I'm going to give that a little sharpen. And we're just going to do exactly the same thing. Oops, broke the tip of my pencil there. And we just want to come out and through again, just some of that area, and just start brightening that up. Mindful of that direction. Mindful of the length as well. Have a look and see where are these little hairs coming out. Again, if you're coming into that darker area, just make sure you're cleaning off that pencil. I'm going to add a little bit more white just up the edge of that eye. Just flicking out a few of those little hairs. Just a few up here. Now what we can do, just to get a little bit more brightness in that fur, again, we've got to be very aware of our tonal values. So we've got to remember where our whitest parts of our bunny are. So up the top here is quite bright, and also down this side of his body. This little part of his face is darker, but we still want to be getting those nice bright sort of highlights in there. So a pencil I love to use is the General's Pastel Chalk White. It's probably the whitest of the pencils that I've found. You can just use a white charcoal pencil, But I do love this one just for coming in and doing those final sort of little tweaks. Again, just have a look at your reference and just pulling in some of those brighter hairs. Again, just flick a few of those out, making sure you're still getting that direction right. Get rid of that little bit of pigment. And I'm just going to brighten up just the edge of that eye a little bit. Maybe just pull a few of those little eyelashes or eyebrows just over the top. I think this little section here also needs to be a bit lighter. I might just use a bit of the ivory again. Just now that I've got that other section in there, we can just come in and pop in a few more little hairs coming up from that nose. Like so. Alright. Look, I think we might stop there. One other little technique I just want to show you is using, if I can find it, you can use either your craft knife. I used to always just use one of these little ones here, and they just have the little blades that come up. But then I discovered the slice tool, which has got a ceramic blade. And these are great for just like this little section here on the bunny. You know, you can see that darker lines coming through. With a slice tool, you can actually just pull that tool through some of those hairs. And it gives you that lovely sort of sharper point than you would achieve sometimes just with a pencil. And especially on smaller little sections like this. Now, under no circumstances do you need to use one of these tools. It's just, yeah, it's just an extra little thing that you can use. It just gives a little bit more sort of detail into your drawing. So, like I said, that is called a slice tool. You can see that on the camera. But yeah, a normal craft knife would do exactly the same job. So we've got the little face just to complete, and that's not going to take long, for the sole reason is that it's more or less just adding some of this white layer. The little nose will do, but it's a small area, so it's not going to take a lot of time. And then I'll do this little ear and the rest of the body and everything, like I said, in another video for you, and get that sent off. But hopefully that's just sort of giving you a start. It's given us an idea of what our bunny's going to look like. We've still got a bit of work to do, but unfortunately, you know, in an hour and a half, you know, you're really not going to get that much done. You know, a normal little portrait like this would probably take us, probably 3 hours to do. But hopefully that's giving you a little start. Like I said, I will get this one uploaded for you and get that sent off straight away, in case you haven't managed to do it live with me. And then what I'll do is I will finish the rest of this off in another tutorial, and I'll send that one off to you as well, so that you'll be able to complete your whole bunny in the next couple of days. All right, now let me just get myself over to the other camera without cutting everybody off. So bear with me. I made it without losing you all, I hope. I'm just going to have a quick drink of water because I've been talking for an hour and a half. Oh. Well, I survived. Thank you so much for everyone that joined. I'm having a look at the chat now. And yeah, it's wonderful to see so many people from all over the world. It's still hard to believe that I'm sitting here in Australia and I'm able to draw along with everyone in the US, Canada, UK. No, it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Now, if you do have any questions, please ask. But like I said, if you join our free Facebook group, feel free to ask any questions in there. I'll be monitoring that as always, so I can answer any questions you've got. Now, like I said, I'll record, well, it's being recorded, today's session, so I'll get that loaded up for you and I'll get that sent out today, so that you can get started. And then once I've gone and had a cup of coffee, I will come back and I'll do the rest of the drawing, and I'll get that uploaded and that's sent off to you as well. Now, like I said, the Facebook group, I'd love to see you post your finished drawings. I'd love to see what you've created. And before I do go, I just wanted to mention that my next sort of little freebie that I'm offering is going to be called the Whiskers to Wildlife Week. And it's a bit of a celebration because it's almost a year since I created the Whiskers to Wildlife Academy. So I thought it would be a really good chance to just sort of do a couple of things. So my plan is to do a couple of drawings over the course of the week. And I'm actually going to do a graphite drawing as well as a pastel drawing. So, hopefully, I mean, like I said, keep an eye on your inbox. I'll send you all the details on that. It's completely free. Again, it's just, just to get everyone creative and get everyone involved. So I don't think I've got any questions, so I might finish off there. Enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are. And like I said, I'll go off and finish that bunny, and I will catch you all soon. Thanks again so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure. All right, guys, take care. Speak to you all soon.